picture a multimillionaire sitting in a barber chair on a Tuesday afternoon while his barber says, "So what do you do again?" And he answers, "Insurance adjuster." Not because he's embarrassed, not because he's playing games, because the truth would take too long to explain. The truth is that he owns 10 businesses most people would never notice. A car wash tucked behind a grocery store, a pest control route with renewals on auto pay, a laundromat that never appears in conversation, a small fleet of dumpsters, a boring little bookkeeping shop, a storage lot, a vending route, a pressure washing company, a mailbox center, a strip of service businesses so ordinary they disappear into the landscape. His barber doesn't know. His neighbors don't know. The parents at school pickup don't know. And that's the point. We've all seen the other archetype. Call him Colton. Loud car, louder watch, always announcing that he's disrupting the space and democratizing access. Every sentence sounds like a pitch deck trying to escape the room. He wants to look rich first and become solvent later. Then there's the other type, a 2018 Subaru, a $34 fleece, a grocery list in one pocket, and a 7-figure wire transfer in the other. Net worth, $38.4 million. No entourage, no podcast clips, no performance of importance, just systems, renewals, contracts, and a calendar that looks almost insultingly ordinary. That kind of anonymity is not an accident. It is architecture. It is built through 40 small, boring decisions made over a decade. Which business to buy, which contract to keep, which debt to avoid, which lawsuit to make uninteresting, which manager to trust, which paper trail to shorten, which ego to starve. And somewhere along the way, wealth stops looking like luxury and starts looking like structural security, not fame. Not flexing, not chasing the next sale, just a quiet life supported by cash flow that keeps showing up. That is the real fantasy for a lot of adults. Not being seen, being safe. The 3-part boring test. Most flashy businesses die from the same disease. They need attention at the exact rate your nervous system can no longer provide it. They are built on novelty. Novelty expires. They are built on story. Story gets copied. They are built on momentum. Momentum is expensive to fake. A boring business is different. It does not need to be exciting because the customer was never looking for excitement in the first place. Nobody wants to be inspired by pest control. Nobody wants a visionary lawn treatment. Nobody wants a thought leader in junk removal. They want the ants gone, the grass cut, the trash moved, the gate repaired, the invoice sent, the headache over. That's why boring businesses can be so durable. They often operate closer to human habit than human hype. If you are trying to move from a 9-to-5 into ownership, you need a filter, a test. Here's the 3-part boring test. First, repeat need. Does the problem come back on its own? Grass grows back, pests return, trash accumulates, cars get dirty again, tenants keep needing maintenance. If demand regenerates naturally, you are no longer relying on constant persuasion. You are relying on the ordinary decay and repetition of life itself. Second, low friction price. Is the purchase small enough that the buyer doesn't hold a family summit before saying yes? Usually that means something in the range of $12 to $85, sometimes a little more depending on the service. The point is psychological. If the amount is low enough, the customer skips deliberation. They don't open a spreadsheet. They don't call their brother-in-law. They just solve the problem. Third, asset ownership. Do you own the equipment, the route, the contract, the location, the customer relationship, or the operating entity in a way that lets money come in without your physical presence? This matters more than people think. If the income disappears the moment you stop showing up, you don't own a business. You own a demanding job with branding. This is why the phrase, relying on recurring revenue rather than chasing the next sale, sounds boring to amateurs and beautiful to adults. Recurring revenue means tomorrow has less drama in it. It means your rent is not competing with your optimism. It means you can make fewer heroic decisions. And if you don't have enough capital yet to buy or launch something with real structure, there is a bridge version of this life. Think of it as the digital the Kedar model, a contractor but modern. You get the client, you define the scope, you collect the payment, then you subcontract the actual execution to specialists who work behind the scenes. You become the organizer, not the labor. A client wants lead generation, bookkeeping, design support, ad ops, video editing, appointment setting, website maintenance. You sell the outcome, manage the relationship, and outsource the moving parts. It is not the final empire, but it can be the first pile of clean capital. And that matters, because almost every invisible empire begins with one humble thing that worked a little better than expected, then got repeated with more discipline than style. The legal firewall now comes the part nobody wants to talk about because it sounds like paperwork. But paperwork is exactly where invisible wealth becomes durable wealth. Let's say you start with one rental property. Maybe that is the first real asset you control. It throws off some cash. It teaches you how tenants behave, how repairs snowball, how insurance actually works, how small leaks become large invoices. At that point, most people still think like operators. The sophisticated move is to start thinking like a map maker. Level 1 is the individual LLC. One business, one box. Another business, another box. The rental property sits in one LLC. The pest control route in another. The laundromat in another. The storage lot in another. This is not paranoia. It is containment. If one thing catches fire, you do not want the whole forest to burn with it. A slip and fall at the car wash should not threaten the mailbox center. A dispute with one vendor should not pull in the vending route. Liability needs walls. Level 2 is the holding company. This is the quiet parent above the noise. Instead of you trying to directly manage every piece forever, the holding company becomes the manager or the owner or the coordinating layer depending on how the structure is designed. It centralizes decisions. It simplifies the tree. It helps you think in systems instead of fragments. This is where you begin consolidating the tree, not by collapsing everything into one vulnerable bucket, but by organizing control so your daily life is not 10 alarms all ringing at once. You manage one entity that quietly manages the rest. One dashboard, one command layer, one place where strategy lives. Level 3 is the anonymity layer. This is where people suddenly get uncomfortable because they confuse privacy with secrecy and secrecy with guilt. But privacy is not guilt. Privacy is often just prudence. In some states, with proper registered agents and lawful structuring, your personal name does not need to be the first thing a stranger sees when they start clicking through public databases. Wyoming gets mentioned a lot for this reason. Not because it's magic, not because it makes you invisible to courts or taxes or legitimate authority, but because it helps keep random curiosity from becoming a map of your life. And that matters more as your footprint grows, because the more visible your asset base becomes, the more invitations you receive from people and problems you did not ask for. Predatory plaintiffs, casual borrowers, social pressure disguised as closeness, business opportunities that are really extraction attempts wearing loafers, which leads to level 4, the trust. This is where the paper trail starts to run out of road for the average snoop. Again, not to avoid lawful obligations, not to cosplay as a spy, but to create distance between your name and the full inventory of what you control. At each layer, the point is the same. Reduce blast radius, reduce visibility, reduce dependency on you as a public personality. The money is just what the structure happens to be holding. That sentence changes the way you think about wealth. If you think the money belongs to your ego, you will showcase it. If you think the money belongs to the structure, you will protect it. And the adults who win for a long time almost always choose protection over theater. The air traffic controller people imagine 10 businesses means 10 giant screens, a war room, 3 phones, and a personality disorder. Usually it means something much quieter. It means checklists, managers, weekly reporting, bank rules, threshold alerts, a short list of numbers that actually matter. The best model I've ever seen for this is what I call the air traffic controller approach. You are not in every cockpit. You are not serving every customer. You are not the technician, the cashier, the dispatcher, and the closer. You are routing, monitoring, escalating, deciding. Each business gets a general manager or an operator, not a genius, not a celebrity, just someone stable, sober, competent, and allergic to drama. They run the lane in front of them. They solve local problems. They own the weekly rhythm. And here is where the compartmentalization becomes critical. Your general managers do not all need to know each other. In many cases, they shouldn't. Your banker does not need the full map. Your attorney does not need the operating minutiae of every branch. Your bookkeeper may only need their clean third of the picture. Each professional sees what they must see to do their job well, and not much beyond that. That is not distrust. That is design. No one person should be able to reconstruct the entire empire from casual exposure, not because you are hiding from reality, but because concentration of knowledge is concentration of vulnerability. There is a cost to this, though, a serious one. If you build it well, you become the only wire that runs through all 10 rooms at once. You are the only one who knows why this LLC guarantees that lease, why that route funds this debt service, why that manager cannot be moved, why that vendor relationship matters, why one tiny insurance policy is protecting a much larger chain reaction. That makes you powerful. It also makes you load-bearing, and load-bearing people carry a private kind of stress, because if you get sick, disappear for 2 weeks, or die unexpectedly, the structure can become a puzzle no one solves fast enough. Which is why one of the most underrated documents in private wealth is not a manifesto. It is not a business plan. It is not a motivational whiteboard. It is a succession memo, a plain language document that says, here is what exists, here is where it sits, here is who to call, here is how cash moves, here is what must never be interrupted, here is where the passwords are, here is what not to sell in a panic. If you are building an invisible empire, that memo is not optional. It is mercy, because secrecy without continuity is just another form of negligence. Protection and peace at some point. If you do this long enough, you realize the point was never to look important. The point was to become hard to damage. A forensic accountant can be brilliant and still find almost nothing useful at first glance if everything is layered, separated, documented correctly, and legally maintained. A predatory lawsuit loses a lot of emotional energy when the target is not a person performing wealth, but a maze of modest entities, ordinary records, limited disclosures, and clean walls. That is what people misunderstand about stealth wealth. It is not antisocial. It is anti-chaos. Anonymity is an insurance premium against a version of life you have no interest in living. And maybe the most beautiful part of all this is not the accumulation. It is the discretion. Maybe your sister's furnace dies in January. Maybe your mother needs help, but would never accept a check if it felt like charity. So you route the help through dignity, a loyalty discount, a contractor promotion, a conveniently available replacement. The problem gets solved. The house gets warm again, and nobody has to feel small to be cared for. That kind of wealth is different. Not wealth as spectacle, wealth as insulation, wealth as options, wealth as a quiet hand beneath the table, holding everything steady. So if you're standing at the edge of a 9-to-5, wondering what the real upgrade looks like, maybe it's not a personal brand. Maybe it's not virality. Maybe it's not a startup that makes you sound interesting at dinner. Maybe it's 10 boring businesses, 10 small engines, 10 ordinary doors, 10 streams of cash flow that do not need applause to keep moving. And maybe the ultimate flex is this: to barely exist on paper, to let the structure do the talking, to let the numbers compound quietly without ceremony, to understand that the money is just what the structure happens to be holding, not fame, not noise, not proof, just peace.